right, I want to talk very briefly about a couple of topics that came to mind, and then do a rapid-fire Q&A. All right, most of these places I go and I start talking by saying Bitcoin is not just a currency. Currency is the first app. Bitcoin is a platform for decentralized consensus. I think you already got that. You saw so many speakers today who had so many ideas that had absolutely nothing to do with currency. Why is decentralized consensus important? All of the things we see that require hierarchical institutions today are the results of scaling problems. We can't do consensus at scale, or we couldn't do consensus at scale. So in order to solve that problem, we created hierarchies, we created organizations, we put our trust in people to make the decisions for us through representative government, through corporations, through other hierarchical organizations. These hierarchical organizations solve the problems of scale that existed since the 17th century. And decentralized consensus solves that problem. It allows us to do consensus at massive scale. How do I know? Because Bitcoin works. It works to secure $10 billion at consensus at a massive scale all across the internet. And we have proven that we can solve problems of consensus and decision-making without hierarchical organizations, without centralized authorities, without trusting people, without trusting systems, but with purely trusting algorithms and math. Now, I have no idea where this is going, but I know it's a really powerful idea. And once you prove that it works, game over. Hierarchical institutions are no longer required to solve these problems of scale because we have distributed consensus. And even if Bitcoin goes away, once people know that this works, they will recreate distributed consensus systems again and again and again to solve all of the problems. The internet was the first system that allowed us to do decentralized information sharing, information aggregation, information collection, and information broadcasting without censors, without hierarchical organizations. Before the internet, in order to have an opinion, you had to have a press that was 4 football fields long and 3 stories high. You had to buy ink by the barrel. And once we had the internet, we could do decentralized information sharing, and anyone could have power in their voice equivalent to the New York Times, equivalent to the biggest newspapers and publishing media empires in the world, and we freed information. Bitcoin and decentralized consensus system can do this not just for money, but for many other types of organization. So now we can create the same exact example of what happened on the internet. Bitcoin also allows innovation at the edge, innovation without permission. All of the financial systems we have and all of the contract systems we have require access control because you have to be vetted, because trust in the system depends on excluding bad actors. Bitcoin does not require that because the trust is based on computation. And once trust is based on computation, you can open that network and give access to everyone. And everyone can add applications at the edge of the network and do innovation without permission. So let me tell you something else that most people haven't noticed. Bitcoin is not about taking some parts of the economy and translating them from pound sterling into Bitcoin or translating them from the US dollar into Bitcoin. We are not going to absorb the economy. Screw that. The economy is stagnant and dying because it's composed mostly of financialization and war, and we don't want that anymore. Right now, Bitcoin is a little island of jobs and innovation in the middle of a stagnant economy, and it's creating its own economic activity. We don't need to absorb the other currencies because we're creating our own jobs. Since October of this year, I've been paid 100% in Bitcoin, and there are at least a dozen people in this room who earn all of their income in Bitcoin and do all of their spending in Bitcoin and live 100% in Bitcoin. In a Bitcoin economy that is hiring like crazy, hiring developers, hiring lawyers, hiring accountants, hiring web designers. We are building a new economy from the ground up, and it is a vibrant economy. We don't need to absorb the other currencies. We're creating our own economic activity from the ground up. That's the real story of Bitcoin. And what that means is that the acceleration we're seeing today, there are hundreds and hundreds of startups creating thousands of jobs, and this is going to create even more momentum in this space. Bitcoin is not a 10-year technology. This is all going to play out in the next 2 years, and we're along for the ride, so hold on to your hats. All right, so I want to hear from the London community, and I'll just take questions as quickly as I can, and give you 5 to 10 second answers as quickly as I can. So shout them loud, and let's go. I'm not interested in Circle. I haven't paid much attention to them. Next.
What happens at the end of 2 years?
At the end of 2 years, I think we'll achieve momentum and adoption at such a rate that Bitcoin will be firmly positioned as part of the financial future of the world, and cryptocurrencies will have proven their worth. I think already Bitcoin is entirely unstoppable, but it hasn't reached the minds of most of the people out there. What you can do to make it happen is tell 2 more people about Bitcoin every single day and give them some Bitcoin as quickly as possible. Get them to be part of this economy. Yes, next. The New York hearings demonstrated what happens when dinosaurs see the meteor that's incoming and start screaming at it. And they say, you cannot happen, and you will not happen. And guess what? The meteor doesn't give a shit. They didn't understand Bitcoin, and they will try to fight it, but at the end of the day, they cannot fight it, because Bitcoin is a global phenomenon and it's entirely decentralized. And guess what the New York DFS does not have? It does not have the power of consensus. They can write code, and they will be on the minority blockchain, and we will ignore them.
What do you think of Ethereum?
I think Ethereum is a very interesting system, and I think I'm going to build something to use Bitcoin to buy Ethereum contracts, and we can make the 2 work together beautifully. Ethereum expresses the next wave of decentralization, the decentralization of law, and I'm going to be running Ethereum as soon as it comes out, and I'm looking forward to more innovation. Ethereum shows what happens when the people who are fighting us are fighting Bitcoin of 2008, and we've moved on. We're 5 years past that, and we've added a shit ton of innovation on top of it, and our innovation is only accelerating. It's not slowing down. So they can try and regulate us, they can try and understand it, and by the time they do, we've moved on.
How do we stop the suits? How do we stop the suits, the bankers and those with power taking over?
How do I stop the bankers from taking over? Well, they can't take over because they don't have consensus. We're going to continue to build this, and global adoption will happen. Because this is not about a single country or a single banking system adopting Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be adopted by the most populous economy in the world, the internet, by the most powerful and most valuable economy in the world, the internet. And that economy is global, and it doesn't depend on the regulation of any single country. Bitcoin is useful, people will use it. Done.
What do you think about Dogecoin?
Sorry?
What do you think about Dogecoin?
I think Dogecoin shows you what happens when you have an open market for currencies. I truly believe that we will see not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies will be created through a GUI by 5-year-olds in school in order to trade with their friends. Cryptocurrencies will be created as reputation coins by individuals, as novelty coins, as funding systems for corporations and IPOs. Cryptocurrencies will be generated by the thousands, and then by the hundreds of thousands, and eventually by the millions, in a purely free market where they will be interchangeable for value amongst each other. So cryptocurrencies are going to be plentiful. Here's the thing that most people don't understand. Up to now, currencies derived their value because only a few people could create them. Just like information on the internet before the internet age derived its value by the fact that you had a giant press and only a few people had a giant press. Once we had the internet, we had to start evaluating information differently. Since everybody had an opinion, we had to decide which opinions mattered, not by who was printing them, but what they said. Cryptocurrencies now will start being created by the thousands, and that means that scarcity of creation does not define value. Monetary value is defined purely by adoption. The cryptocurrencies that are adopted broadly have value because they're being used. And out of the millions of cryptocurrencies, very few will have monetary value. And I don't know where the next one will come. One day, Dogecoin or a coin like that will suddenly go from being a fad and a meme to having monetary value. And everyone will be surprised, but it doesn't matter because we'll be able to interchange them all. Bitcoin isn't going anywhere because cryptocurrencies are proliferating. Instead, it will become the reserve currency that backs many of the other cryptocurrencies, just like a gold standard.
What's going to happen when Bitstamp has its bank account shut down and then Stocks have their bank account shut
When Bitstamp and Mt. Gox have their bank accounts shut down, it's going to put a lot more pressure on us to use local Bitcoins and other systems of exchange that are decentralized. Centralized exchanges are going to be the main focus of the battle against cryptocurrencies, and if they are attacked, we're going to build decentralized exchanges. And once we build decentralized exchanges, there's nothing to attack.
What's the biggest hurdle for Bitcoin?
Biggest hurdle for Bitcoin right now is adoption. The only thing that matters is users. It doesn't matter what the price is. At $1, Bitcoin is just as useful as it is at $10,000. All that matters is users. Get as many people as you know to adopt Bitcoin. Give Bitcoin out every single day, just a tiny bit to everyone you meet. Teach them how to install a wallet, create education, write documents, talk about it, ask the taxi driver if they take Bitcoin. And then in a year, you'll ask them, do you still take sterling?
What percentage of the population do you think understands Bitcoin so far? And what is the other side of the coin?
So what percentage of the population understands Bitcoin? A tiny, 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 tiny percentage of the population. Let's not mistake ourselves. Right now, Bitcoin is about as big as most obscure fetishes on the internet. We are a tiny community, but the important thing is...
That big?
No, it's 1/10,000% right now, but that doesn't matter because we have a useful currency, and as people use it, they know it's useful and they start using it. It's as simple as that. We're growing at exponential rates. You can see these meetups growing at exponential rates, and people have a difficult time understanding exponential growth. When you're looking at an exponential curve from the perspective of human perception, what you see is a horizontal line until you hit the elbow, and then it's vertical. And that's exactly what's going to happen with Bitcoin adoption. We're going to struggle along to get the next year of adoption and gradually build this community, and then it's going to go viral and mainstream, and it's going to explode across the world in small pockets of population.
Is it true that if some organisation invested millions of dollars in hardware stuff, they could actually disrupt?
If an organization invested hundreds of millions of dollars in order to participate in a 51% attack, they would be able to momentarily disrupt the next block for the next 10 minutes, having wasted hundreds of millions of dollars to do a double spend that depreciates the currency temporarily until we kick them off the network, and then reboot everything and continue as if nothing happens, and they just wasted hundreds of millions of dollars. Or they could use that to mine and get the reward. The incentive structures work. 51% attacks are entirely a theoretical issue and do not affect us at all.
Will you come and say hello?
I'll come and say hello on Twister, yes, thank you. Do we need more education on the blockchain? Yes, people need to understand that this is a technology, this is an invention. It doesn't matter who invented it, it doesn't matter how many different ways we use it. It's a technology that will continue to exist regardless of its implementation. The blockchain is one of the most important inventions in computer science in the century, and it will revolutionize human experience and human relationships. It allows us to do decentralized decision making. People think that Bitcoin is a currency used by drug dealers. And that's fine, because at first they thought the internet was a den of thieves, pornographers, and drug dealers, and guess what? The rest of us started using it. Make no mistake about it, governments and banks are not terrified that drug dealers will use Bitcoin. They're terrified that all of the rest of us will. Gavin's meeting with the Council on Foreign Relations, and he will inform them of Bitcoin, and then we'll move on to other more important things. You know, sometimes people in power want to talk to other people and think they're important. Let them. It's completely irrelevant. Gavin doesn't control Bitcoin any more than I do, and I think it's important to talk to everyone about Bitcoin and let the people who understand it join the bandwagon, and let the people who don't understand it get run over by the bandwagon. Oh, the second app, I think the progression of apps on Bitcoin starts with peer-to-peer payment systems. Then the second most important app is empowering remittances to solve the issue of $74 billion being stolen from the poorest people in the world in order to finance the operation of organizations like Western Union. We can take the cost down to zero, and we can deliver $74 billion to the poorest people in the world to use for water and sanitation, food and education, and that's going to uplift possibly 1 billion people out of poverty. After peer-to-peer payments, we can do peer-to-peer lending, which will allow a farmer in Kenya or a shopkeeper in Nairobi to crowdsource a loan from 10,000 lenders all across the world directly in Bitcoin without any banks being involved. Once we're done with peer-to-peer lending, we're going to do peer-to-peer crowdsourcing, where we can have a company start up in the middle of nowhere and fund its operations directly from hundreds of thousands of shareholders around the world, bypassing all of the world's stock markets and going IPO by themselves without asking anybody's permission. Argentina is doing a pretty damn good job helping themselves. Right now, Bitcoin is banned, just as are currency transactions with foreign currencies, and yet you can go to every street corner and you can change your dollars for pesos at twice the official market rate in a black market. People respect the government less the more the government takes extreme action against them and violates their trust and violates their consent. And they're going to use Bitcoin whether the government likes it or not. Argentina is probably going to be the first place where Bitcoin goes viral, because the more heavy-handed regulation they do, the more it pushes people to Bitcoin. In Argentina, recently I talked to Wences Cesares, who was witnessing two 65-year-old men exchange an apartment costing about $1.5 million entirely in Bitcoin. They had no idea what Bitcoin was. They had two young people do the QR codes for them. But they understood that there was something fundamentally broken about the fact that they had to pay $100,000 in fees to buy an apartment, and instead they did it on Bitcoin for no fees at all. The important thing to realize is that Bitcoin is useful, and useful in a way that changes people's lives. It allows them to transact at much lower cost, and so people will adopt it. They'll adopt it by taking extreme measures if necessary. When I was in Argentina, somebody told me, I came to this conference, my parents were tortured. My parents were tortured by the regime, but I came to this conference because it matters. This stuff really matters in the rest of the world. Oh, I haven't heard of that specific one, but you know, that's kind of bizarre. I think 2014 is where we start seeing applications beyond Bitcoin as a payment system. We see Bitcoin as a platform, and already Ethereum is one of those ideas that's going to take hold. And as we see more and more applications that use Bitcoin as a platform, people stop thinking about it as a currency, and they start thinking about it as the internet of money. And that, once their perception changes, it's easier to adopt. So in 2014, we're going to see massive user adoption, and we're going to see more and more applications beyond currency.
What do you think?
Disruption of credit card companies is going to happen rather slowly, I think, because credit card companies have well-established networks, but the merchants have enormous incentives to move to systems that extract much lower fees. Now, keep in mind that implementing Bitcoin as a merchant system is much easier than implementing credit cards, because the transaction itself is a push transaction. It's not a pull transaction. When you do a credit card transaction, you're giving someone the credentials they need to pull money forever in the future, and therefore you have to trust them, and you have to very carefully protect that information from being captured by someone else. When you do a Bitcoin transaction, you push just the amount that you need to send to that merchant. You don't even need to encrypt it. You can broadcast it over Bluetooth, and that makes it a hell of a lot easier to build merchant systems. We're seeing now merchant systems over Bluetooth, over Wi-Fi, over LED, or even over Chirp, which is a subaudible protocol. Because you can broadcast the transaction, you don't need to build elaborate secure networks. So it's a lot easier to do transaction processing with Bitcoin.
Do you think it's a problem that a lot of Bitcoins are owned by drug traffickers and terrorists?
That's a lie!
Okay, do I think that it's a problem that a lot of Bitcoins are owned by drug traffickers and terrorists? I don't think that's true, for one thing. I don't think that's true at all. I think one of the things that happens in society is that criminals tend to use the most effective technology because they operate in areas where they have the highest margin and the highest risk. So it makes a lot of sense for them to use the latest technology. Criminals were the first to use automobiles, criminals were the first to use cell phones, criminals were the first to use every single disruptive technology. 99.99% of the criminals in the world use shoes. I'm not going to ban shoes just because criminals use them. What we're going to do is we're going to overwhelm the criminals by adopting it for the other 6 billion of us, and then the criminals will be a tiny minority. But one thing I can tell you is that the criminals will not be able to control the currency. They will not be able to control the levers of power behind the currency. They will not be able to control the means of transaction. Right now, many of the biggest criminals in the world are in positions of control of the currency, and they work for organizations like HSBC and Wachovia, where they hundreds of billions of dollars. Wachovia money laundered $670 billion in 10 years, funneling it into the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico that resulted in the deaths of 19,000 people and no one went to jail. The criminals own the justice system, the criminals own the banking system, and they get away with murder every single day. Well, I don't know if there will be criminals on Bitcoin. Of course there'll be criminals on Bitcoin. There'll be criminals like every other segment of society, but they will not control the currency. Well, yes, exactly. I mean, trust and identity in Bitcoin is such that it is actually easier to do radical transparency in Bitcoin than it is to do radical anonymity. And if criminals use Bitcoin, then it's actually easier to track them down than through cash-based systems or banking systems. So criminals who use Bitcoin are going to find it actually harder to operate on Bitcoin. Yes, I think hardware wallets are going to be essential in the future. I think other means of security need to be developed quite rapidly. The thing is that as humans, we have 4.5 million years of experience doing physical security from the first time a caveman buried a squirrel under a rock so the other caveman wouldn't eat it. We have about 50 years of experience in information security. We suck at it. And if we put general purpose computers and we try to use them to secure Bitcoins, we will fail continuously. So the best way to address that is to apply physical security to Bitcoins by printing them onto paper wallets and putting them into tamper-proof hardware devices where they cannot be attacked. We're going to see a lot more of that in 2014. And I hope we're going to do a lot better job with security before it hits mainstream. Otherwise, a lot of people are going to have their money stolen on Bitcoin. That is a significant issue, and I'm working in security very actively to fix some of those problems. I recently took a job as the Chief Security Officer at Blockchain Info. I hope to bring some of that security innovation, but most importantly, I'm working with many of the other Chief Security Officers and security professionals in the Bitcoin space to improve security overall. Security is a collaborative function. Nobody wins by doing better security, but you can lose by doing worse security, and the whole industry loses when one of us loses. So if we work together, we can do better.
What do you think the peak value is when it goes mainstream?
What is the peak value when it goes mainstream? I have no idea, but it's probably a lot higher than $1,000 a Bitcoin. I think 2014 and the current situation is probably the last time we're going to see sub-$1,000 Bitcoin.
How can we make Bitcoin more ecologically friendly?
Bitcoin is already, how can we make Bitcoin more ecologically friendly? Bitcoin is already, has the lowest energy footprint in the per transaction than any other payment system in the world. Most people ignore the fact that for Visa, for example, 40% of the fees go to the overheads of fraud prevention and running data centers and paying guards and dogs and armored trucks and all of the other things that are required to do physical security in a system where trust depends on access control. In Bitcoin, trust depends on computation, and it delivers the lowest energy cost per transaction than any other payment system before. And already we're seeing other proof-of-work systems that have even smaller energy footprints. So the idea that somehow Bitcoin is wasteful is a myth. Sorry? Proof of stake, proof of work systems that are less CPU intensive and more memory intensive. There are many, many other approaches we can take.
Blockchain safe on mobile? Is blockchain info the wallet safe on mobile?
Is blockchain info safe on the mobile? Well, one thing I can tell you about the philosophy behind blockchain info is that everything happens on the client. That means that blockchain info itself doesn't have access to your keys, doesn't store your money, and couldn't steal your money even if we tried. In fact, on blockchain info, we barely know who our customers are, what their addresses are, and how much money they have. We don't see any of that information because all of the wallet functions happen on the browser side. And you know, as we develop new protocols like CoinPunk that Kyle was talking about, we're going to move that security to the browser. And yes, I think mobile applications are actually quite secure, and you can build some very robust security around them.
The rise of distributed networks, consensus networks, do you see governments ever having a future?
With the rise of distributed networks, do I see governments having a future? Yes, absolutely. These are organizations that have existed for hundreds of years, and they will continue to exist for hundreds of years, but we're going to disrupt their basic functions quite dramatically. I think governments will have to adapt. Banks will have to adapt. The important thing to realize is that we're not going to replace banks. And we're not going to replace government either. What we're going to do is we're going to remove a lot of their power and leverage, and we're going to make them less relevant in the lives of most people. The internet didn't replace telephones, it made telephones irrelevant. The internet didn't replace news systems, it made news systems irrelevant. It didn't replace media organizations or entertainment organizations. It just made them less powerful and relevant and gave people more choice. And the same thing is going to happen with distributed consensus systems. No, I don't think crypto is going to destroy fiat at all. Right, what do I think about a hybrid model? I think, in fact, that in many countries you're going to see them understand that blockchain-based currencies are more effective and more efficient. I sometimes imagine a student studying economics 100 years from now, and in the first semester they have to take classic currencies and they have to study the 1% proof of stake attack against the dollar in 2008 and how that led to the replacement of fiat currencies with blockchain currencies. And they will have a very hard time understanding why any civilization would put its trust in hierarchical organizations that are unaccountable and haven't been voted on by anyone. As a result, I think blockchain-based currencies and cryptocurrencies will gradually start replacing fiat currencies, but that doesn't mean that fiat currencies won't exist. Bitcoin itself is a fiat currency. It's based on the fiat of the algorithm. It's based on the decision to trust the mathematics. And people will start designing governmental coins that provide algorithmic certainty in their issuance. Maybe they'll take different approaches, maybe more inflation, maybe less inflation, maybe different issuance patterns, maybe they'll put controls in there. What's important, though, is that individuals will now have a choice. You do no longer choose the currency based on where you live. You choose the currency based on it representing the politics that you agree with and representing the value structure that you believe in. And so you will choose the currency that's most efficient and most appropriate for your use, and you will join a global community that agrees with you by choosing that currency. Currencies will become communities of common purpose, and we will have free choice to choose them. Now, if someone builds FedCoin or US government coin, they can build that. The question is who will choose to use that. And if they build a currency that provides value to society, we'll use it, and if they don't, we won't. Yes, do I think Bitcoin will encourage people to save? Bitcoin's deflationary nature does encourage saving. Now, some people call that hoarding, other people call that saving. It's really a matter of degrees.